Welcome back. Now, the South African Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee is set to announce its January interest rate decision this week. And the focus is not just on the decision nor the number of members, but with who they are. Now, with the departure of former Deputy Governor Kuben Naidoo and the possibility of new faces, the committee's composition raises concerns about the central bank's leadership in this election year. Now, as markets eagerly anticipate the interest rate decision, joining us now to explore the possible nuances of this is Editor-at-Large for Business Day, Hilary Joffe. Hilary, always a pleasure. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
All right, big year for the MPC, so big year for the SARB, Hilary. It is an election year, so there's quite a lot to take in, and uncertainty, I would say. Let's just talk about the changes that the MPC is meant to undergo today, or even the SARB as a whole.
It's the SARB as a whole. Because what you've got unusually is a bunching of all the appointments, or rather the end of all the terms of the governor and his two remaining deputies. Kuben Naidoo, as you will know, resigned or ended his contract prematurely last year. The two other deputy governors' contracts end in August. Governor Kganyago's contract ends in November. So the whole leadership is sort of bunched together. They can be renewed, they can be reappointed for terms of up to 5 years. Or they must be replaced. So the president has got to decide on all four of those positions, and the fact that he's procrastinated and continues to procrastinate on Mr. Naidoo's resignation is, in my opinion, not a very good start to the year. Take into account that it's a difficult political year. The president's going to be under a lot of pressure going into a tough election. The ANC may lose a majority and have to go into a coalition. All sorts of political trade-offs may be sort of necessary. And my worry, I have to say, is that in a year like this, to have such uncertainty over the leadership of the Reserve Bank is slightly concerning.
I mean, Hilary, you mentioned the issue of politics here. And these appointments, all at the discretion of the president?
Completely, 100%. The law says he must consult with the Minister of Finance and the Reserve Bank's board, but the way the law is worded, he doesn't actually have to take what they say into account.
Sure.
Now, I think we can trust the president to do some serious consulting and apply his mind, but there is no process. That is the process, pretty much, and there are no criteria, other than that the governor himself or herself must be a person of tested banking experience. There's, you know, you look at private commercial banks and the kind of process they go through, this huge, thorough process to appoint a chief exec. And here we are with people whose personalities and competence and integrity is absolutely material for the country. And there's no real process except that the president makes the appointment.
In your article, you mentioned that it doesn't matter how many people sit there. It really matters who they are. And this issue of integrity, of course, in South Africa seems to be one that sometimes, I would say, escapes us. We don't quite get it right all the time, Hilary. And then we have, of course, the added complication of some people calling for the mandate of the Reserve Bank to change as a whole. Is this why it's so important who the governor is and who sits around him, who's in his ear?
Yes, and it's not just integrity. Obviously, that's important in any position. Credibility matters a huge amount when you're making monetary policy. Because if we don't believe that they're going to bring inflation down, we're just going to kind of double the wage demand and double the price, thinking that inflation's going to go crazy later in the year or later in the next few years. And the same with the markets. If they don't believe inflation is under control, basically, and that when it spikes, the SARB will bring it down, then you get a real problem with expectations going up, prices spiraling. So in monetary policy, more than many things, credibility actually matters to the outcome. So we need credible people, we need competent people, and monetary policy this year is also not an easy business because this is the year of the turning point, of the pivot. We're waiting for the Fed, we're waiting to see what happens. The SARB on Thursday and for the rest of this year is going to be watching all these risks to inflation. And it is, at the best of times, quite an art as well as a science to make interest rate decisions. And I think this year is one of those years where competence and credibility really matter.
And I mean, how important is the governor's temperament for the SARB? As a human being, as a person, we know, for instance, that, we've seen the kind of hawkishness from Mr. Kganyago that some people haven't welcomed, where people have their opinions about it. But his temperament as a person, is that important?
Look, he is... Governor Kganyago is just a personality all of his own. He's in a league of his own. And I think that's what we've become used to, this mixture of political sus, if you like, and economic expertise, and globally regarded. I mean, don't forget, he's been the chair of one of the International Monetary Fund's key committees. He's really very, very highly regarded, very seasoned in the ways of the world. You know, it's going to take somebody else a long time to step into those shoes, but it doesn't mean we couldn't get somebody very competent if he is not reappointed. And I think the mandate is important in the sense that the temperament matters up to a point. I mean, the committee in the end is mandated to keep prices stable, in other words, to contain inflation. So whatever their temperaments, that is what they are tasked with doing, and they have to account to all of us into Parliament if that is not what they achieve and if inflation starts spiralling. So I think there is a safeguard, an institutional safeguard, etc., on what the Monetary Policy Committee does. Less so in some of what the Reserve Bank does in its other activities, because remember, the Reserve Bank looks after the banks, looks after the soundness, the financial soundness of banks and insurers and financial markets. That is actually another part of its mandate. It actually does have two mandates. The other is for financial stability, but it's obviously less well defined than something like an inflation rate with inflation targeting. It looks after our payment system. All of these things are really very important for the economy, and again, credibility, integrity, competence in our governor and our deputy governors matters a great deal.
And with that said, Hilary, what are we anticipating this week to come out of that MPC? It looks like we're in a hold environment. Can we expect the same from the South?
We are pretty much in a hold environment. Markets have been all over the place, as you know. You know, and the Fed, I think everyone is waiting for the Fed. And I don't think our MPC can afford to go before the Fed goes because of the implications for the rand and therefore for inflation. And the Fed has been, you know, we're cutting, we're not cutting, it's higher for longer, maybe it's not higher for longer. So I think that uncertainty is something that will be weighing on them. Nobody thinks they're going to do anything now, and I think there is a pattern where there'll be quite a long time where they'll unanimously hold through a few meetings before that pivot. And especially because they've made it very clear, and the governor recently last week at Davos, that they are targeting 4.5%. And while at headline level inflation has come down to below 6%, so it's within target technically, that is not where they're targeting. They are targeting 4.5%. So unless they are convinced, number one, that inflation is headed there for sure, and that the risks posed by the election, posed by the budget, posed by all of these South Africa specific things, as well as the global risk, is kind of manageable, I think they're going to be quite wary of picking that turning point. So the markets were thinking March, which is, I think, getting ahead of itself. July, September, who knows?
We'll be watching very closely, all of us with bated breath. Hilary, thank you so much for your time. That was Editor at Large for Business Day, Hilary Joffe.